Why are these episodes only 5 minutes long? They should be at least 5 hours long. I need more. What are Marvel lacing this show with? Because I am addicted to it. Patti LuPone and lesbianism will do that to ya. Marvel finally got me. Naked Catherine Hahn has got me by the ovaries and there's nothing I can do about it. It's taken over my life. The theories and the possibilities in this show are driving me crazy. I have so many questions about everything and everyone. My brain is like this meme right now. As a disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers, obviously for episode 3, but also potentially for future episodes. I am going to be discussing recent revelations and theories, so you are being warned right here that there are spoilers. I will say, I think the recent revelations are just the tip of the iceberg. I don't think they're the whole story, but we'll get into that. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video, I'm just going to be giving you my thoughts and theories on episode 3 of Agatha All Along. This episode was so good. Some might say it was like a tall glass of wine. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is how incredible the sets look in this episode. They really evoke a nostalgic 80s fantasy vibe, and the level of care and detail in the artistry is one of the show's most impressive elements. There's a certain charm that practical sets have that CGI or green screen are just not able to capture in the same way. And I think Jack, the showrunner, was right in that the actors being physically surrounded by and able to interact with their environment changes the entire energy of the production and its horror aspects. The sets are actually one of the things I'm looking most forward to seeing more of as we go along because they just look so good, so whimsical. Moving on to our characters, let's start with the lady of the hour, Sharon. There were 2 indications early on in this episode that pointed to Sharon's death. The first being that when she wanders off and sits down, she almost gets sucked into the ground. And this was foreshadowing of the fact that she's presumably going to be buried in the ground next episode. We know that Rio joins the gang on the road in episode 4, and there is a clip of her emerging from what looks like a grave. And with Sharon having died, the grave is likely to be hers. I could be wrong, but it seems like the logical conclusion. We'll get more into the Rio emerging from Sharon's grave theory in a bit. The second indication was Sharon saying the line, "Bury me in that kitchen." This clue admittedly was a rather on the nose one, but still, nothing in this script is accidental, and there are consistent clues throughout the dialogue as to what is going to happen in this show. Some clues are just a bit more obvious than others. The next point of interest about Sharon in this episode is when she is under the influence of the poisoned wine. She says the line, "Wanda, I'm begging you, let him breathe," which is a reference to the first episode of WandaVision, where Mr. Hart is choking at dinner. And since the hallucinations in this episode seem to be rooted in the witch's own individual traumas, this line from Sharon highlights the lasting negative impact that Wanda's actions have had upon her victim. The fact that it's the very last line Sharon says before her death is especially tragic. I mean, she's just an innocent older lady who has essentially been subjected to mental and emotional torture at the hands of a witch, and was then freed only to end up being manipulated into a situation that is going to cost her her life at the hands of a witch. Again, savage. They were going straight for the heart, no pun intended, with that one. As for Sharon's death itself, presumably she died due to the fact that her hair wasn't added to the antidote, which, as much as I hate to say it, it does make sense that the witches forgot with how absorbed they were with saving their own skin. But as to whether Sharon is really dead, I think she is, but that doesn't mean it's the last we've seen of her. In the Ballad of the Witch's Road, we have the lines, "If one be gone, we carry on, spirit as our guide." This is potentially a clue that if somebody dies on the road, their spirit is still going to be around. And nothing is as it seems on this show, so perhaps Sharon is going to reappear at some point in some form. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Agatha asking who is Sharon at the very end is also significant and has a bit of a double meaning, because of course there's the whole ongoing joke that Agatha kept referring to Sharon as Mrs. Hart, and Sharon also had her identity warped absorbed by Wanda. But also Agatha could be saying, who is Sharon? As in, that's not actually Sharon who died at all, or that Sharon is not who or what we think she is. Again, we'll have to wait and see. Moving on to Rio Vidal. This is a big spoiler right here, so you're being warned once again to click away if you don't want to hear it. ... There was a Funko Pop reveal a couple of days ago which spoiled the fact that Rio's character is in fact Death. And this reveal seems to be legit. But to be fair, even before that, there have been some obvious hints that Rio's character is connected to Death in some way, or is Death herself. For example, on the promotional tarot card art that Marvel released for the show, the Death card features a dagger which is rather similar to the one that Rio has. And that's a pretty obvious clue. So the spoilers aren't that much out of left field. Am I a little bit annoyed that they confirmed it so early on? Yes. But I also think there's more to Rio being Death than we know. Clearly they have reimagined and reshaped the Death from the comics, and there's still a lot of mystery around Rio and what she can do. Another thing I'd like to point out is that when Aubrey Plaza was discussing her character, she made a comment that we think we know who her character is, but we don't. And this also indicates that there's going to be some kind of twist. As for Rio's connection to episode 3, we can see from promotional clips that she joins the group in episode 4, and it looks as though she emerges from a grave, presumably Sharon's grave as discussed earlier, and this means one of two things. Firstly, Sharon's death in episode 3 gives Rio access to the road, since Rio has a connection to or is Death. Or secondly, since the character of Death is also able to take on various forms, it could be that Rio took on the form of Sharon and was buried as her, but wasn't really dead when she was buried, because she's Death. That sounds a bit out there, but Aubrey Plaza has said her character is a bit of a shapeshifter, so it's not a completely crazy theory. Personally, I feel like Agatha would be able to sense Rio in some form if she was masquerading as Sharon, so I'm leaning towards the fact that Rio arrives through Sharon's death more than the shapeshifting theory, but we'll just have to wait and see. Death also makes an appearance in episode 3 when Lilia is hallucinating, which could potentially mean Rio was actually there in the house in some form, or it might simply be that the image of Death was just part of the hallucination only and nothing more. But it's worth mentioning because it might come up later. Moving on to Agatha. We get some particularly interesting revelations, or red herrings perhaps, about Agatha and her history with her son, Nicholas Scratch, in this episode. Jennifer Cale reveals to Teen that Agatha traded her own child for the Book of the Damned, and that no one knows what became of him. Nicholas might be dead, a demon, or an agent of Mephisto. This mention of Mephisto opens a whole can of theory worms, but I'm not sure that they're going to do anything more with Mephisto beyond mentioning his name. I just don't see how the show would have time to take it there with everything else going on. But that said, there is an empty spot in the credits, which means that we haven't met all of the characters in the show yet, so anything is possible at this stage. From Teen's reaction to what Jen says, it seems he wasn't aware of Agatha's alleged history with her son and appears to be both disturbed and doubtful about it. Whether this is Teen just putting on an act, we don't know. But Jen then adds that she doubts Agatha would even know her own son if he turned up on her doorstep. And what did Teen do? He turned up on Agatha's doorstep. So it seems like the writers want us to make that connection between Agatha and Teen, perhaps to throw us off the Teen/Wiccan theories, or perhaps because there's more to the Teen/Wiccan theories than we think. And this is a hint. Personally, I suspect that Teen has some connection to Nick, but I don't think he's Nick himself, purely because everything about him aligns so closely with him being Wiccan. And again, this is a big spoiler, so click away if you don't want to hear it, but it has been confirmed that Teen is actually Wiccan through the Funko Pop reveals, which pretty much lays the theory that he is secretly Nick, to rest. I don't think that particular spoiler was news to anyone at all, to be honest, but much like with Rio, I suspect there's more to the story with Teen than him simply just being Wiccan. There's still a lot of mystery around his character. Teen also mentions to Alice that a lot happened to him at 13. And this is interesting because we know that Teen is 16 years old in Agatha All Along. And that Agatha All Along is set 3 years after the end of WandaVision. This potentially connects Teen to the events that took place at the end of WandaVision in some way. And if true, I'm curious to see how exactly it plays into his backstory. Interestingly, in Agatha's hallucination, we see that the Darkhold sits inside a bassinet. And this connects back to what Jen was telling Teen about how Agatha allegedly traded Nicholas for the Book of the Damned. However, again, I think there is more to this story than we currently know, and that they're setting the audience up so when the twist is revealed, it will have much more impact. Agatha also seems incredibly traumatized by this hallucination. I mean, yes, the hallucinations are literally related to trauma, I know, but it indicates she has very deep feelings about what happened to Nicholas. And this was also touched upon in the first episode where we saw her looking into Nicholas's bedroom, feeling some type of way. And this tells us there's definitely more to the story than Agatha being a heartless, evil, power-hungry witch who was willing to trade in her child for the Darkhold no problem. Or if that was the case, it's clearly emotionally layered and she's dealing with the consequences. There are a number of theories as to why the Darkhold was sitting in the bassinet. Maybe Agatha tried to use the Darkhold to save Nicholas's life. Maybe she was trying to break a curse or something along those lines. It's also worth mentioning that when the witches realize their outfits have changed, we see Agatha touching her locket/brooch with a relieved expression. And we saw in episode 1 that the locket has a lock of hair inside, which is presumably Nicholas's hair. And if so, this is yet another way in which we can see how Agatha still has an emotional attachment to her son and how she's keeping him close to her. I also think that Nicholas's hair may come into play later on. We know that certain spells require human hair, so if Agatha has plans pertaining to that, that would explain at least partially why she's so relieved to still have the locket. Agatha also seems increasingly protective of Teen in this episode. She stands between him and the other women when they are quizzing him about the sigil and redirects their attention to the road, and she drinks the poisoned wine to stop him from drinking it, and this tells us she has some level of attachment to him already that is likely related to her losing her own son. It's possible that she sees Nicholas in Teen, or that Teen reminds her of Nicholas, and that he's becoming the son that she lost. In any case, it's very obvious that all of this is headed to an incredibly emotionally messy place. Better prepare yourselves. Interestingly, Agatha first tries to leave the house when Teen mentions that the vibes are giving middle-aged second chance at love, and then again much more desperately when death is mentioned. In fact, when death is mentioned, she frantically tries to smash out the window, and presumably the reason that she panicked at the mention of death is because Death is not only her ex-wife, but she's an ex-wife who has expressed that she would take great joy in seeing her dead. So it was both fear for her life and gay fear that had her trying to find an exit pretty quickly. I thought this episode also offered some interesting insight into the backstory of the other witches, because at this point all of them are still incredibly mysterious characters who we don't know much about. To be honest, this episode gave us more questions than it did answers about the other witches, but it was a nice introductory glimpse at what looks to be rather interesting lore. I thought the exit through the oven was also a nice touch in this episode. Of course, there's a rather obvious reference to Hansel and Gretel there, with the witch in that story ending up trapped in an oven. But also, interestingly, ovens can symbolise fertility and domesticity, both of which are tied to or associated with womanhood. And considering the underlying feminist themes and also Agatha's storyline with Nicholas, the oven could be seen as having a further significance in that way too. Or maybe not, but I thought it was an interesting concept. concept. And finally, water is a prominent theme throughout this episode. Firstly, Team points out that the moons on the door are in the water phase, which is an indication that the trial includes water in some way. And this also connects to the fact that Jennifer Kale is the witch who represents the water element. As well as this, it's also foreshadowing of the threat of drowning, which was a method that witches were historically murdered by, and also takes us back to what Rio said to Agatha when she said she'd like to see her burn, hang, or drown. There is also a crab on one of the cushions outside the house. And this also threads into the theme because crabs are not only aquatic creatures, but also represent the water sign Cancer. I mean, the way that clues and connections about the narrative are threaded into every single aspect of this show is just insane. I love it here. Overall, I thought episode 3 was another solid episode. It did leave me with more questions than it did answers, but we're still very early on in the season, so that makes sense. Either way, I am seated for episode 4. I have a feeling it's going to be really, really, really good. I can't wait. I am so seated. Okay guys, let me know your thoughts and theories on episode 3 down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.